Hello and welcome to another edition of Mailbag. What is Mailbag? Well, Mailbag is a feature of the channel where you guys leave lots of comments on the channel and I attempt to answer those comments, or if I can't answer those comments, I throw it out to you guys who have more knowledge on some of this stuff than I do. So let's get into the first mailbag of this session. Remember, like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Go over to Instagram and follow me there. Go over to Facebook, follow me there. That's where the normal notices are. And consider becoming a Patreon. The next comment comes from A2I Sounds. And this is in response to my Korg T1 doesn't work. A video I did in October 2021. I had to sort of like digest the date there. For some reason I've written it in an American format and I couldn't work out why. Anyway, A2I says, "Hi John, I just wanted to share my experience regarding the history of the M1 T series 01W to bring some light in product history back then. The year was 1991 when I was playing keyboard in a cover band. Back when I was playing Yamaha boards for about 8 years and simply loved the Yamaha sounds over anything I'd heard from other keyboards. I had not heard a lot of other boards and did not read any keyboard magazines back then. I was just happy with what I had. One day our lead guitar player brought a friend with him to our rehearsal session, and his friend was accompanied by a Korg T3. I was not aware of the Korg T models at all. Not only was this guy an absolutely amazing keyboard player with years of lessons in classical piano, but the sounds of the T3 blew all my fuses. My SY55, my beloved friend, my unbeatable dream machine, within a few seconds sounded to me like a board from ancient and lost culture. I instantly fell in love with the T3 sounds. The next shop selling Korg keyboards was 70 kilometers away. A trip I made the following Saturday to try one out. It sounds like Simon Mayo, doesn't it? You know, should be playing. Sorry, I don't mean to take the mickey. It's the way this is reading. After about 2 hours of smiling while playing the T3, the decision was made. I would not replace my SY55, buy an SY77, which was the natural progression, but I was going to buy a Korg T3 instead. The guy in the shop told me he had enough stock for my T3 to be sold, and I can pick one up any time I like. I didn't have the money at the time. About 6 months later, all was prepared. I had saved up enough money, sold my SY55 without regrets, I might add, and drove the 70 kilometers to get my Korg T3. But alas, a surprise at the shop. The Korg T3 was no more on sale and it was replaced by a new model, which was the 01W. I could have brought a Korg T2. They had that in stock, but that was too expensive for me at the time. And on top of it, I did not want to carry a huge and heavy keyboard to our gigs. Buy a new case, and I wasn't sure it'd even fit in my small car. Well, that is actually a problem I had when I got rid of my car and I started borrowing one of the housemates' cars to transport keyboards around. In that my keyboards are bigger than her boot, her back seat, but luckily her front seat goes down, so it actually my keyboard will go literally front to back in her car. But anyway, that's a side point. The 01W did sound great, no question, but it didn't catch me as much as the T3 did a few months earlier, that I played a few months earlier. I was a bit confused about what to do. I needed a board for the band quickly because I'd sold my SY55, and I was not sure a used T3 would show up for sale in the local ads within the next few days. So I ended up buying a Korg M1, which was still on regular sale while the 01W hit the market, and surprisingly I had some money left. From now until 1995 I visited the music store where I bought my Korg M1 2 or 3 times a year. As mentioned, the T3 was replaced by the O1W and then by the O1W FD. Later, the O1W Pro replaced the T2, and the O1W Pro X even shared the same housing with the T1. Many years later, I visited a friend of my uncle who owned a T1 and an O1W Pro X, which looked very impressive to see these two monsters stacked on top of each other. I also remember on the day the store had a brand new Korg M1s for sale at around 2/3 of the price that I had paid, and a few months later for the Korg X3 was available. To sum up my experience, the O1W series was the successor to the T series, and the X3 was the true successor to the Korg M1. Do you know what? That is a really, really good summary of kind of the Korg history around this point in time. It's true to say that the Korg M1, despite the models that followed it, carried on selling way after its natural usable life, and the reason for that was it was such a good keyboard. You know, there was nothing wrong with the M1. You know, the T series was kind of seen as I always saw the T series as a natural successor to the M1. But you know, there was nothing wrong with the M1 architecture, and while the M1 was still available, people would still buy it. Now, I possess both the Korg T1 and the Yamaha SY55. Both, unfortunately, are still in storage. And while I've not really spent an awful lot of time with the SY55, that's the God's honest truth. I mean, I bought it, I've got a whole bunch of repairs to do to it, but because of the circumstances, you know, it's gone down to storage, and it's been pretty much in storage for the last year. So I spent very little time with it, and very little time being able to compare the two keyboards. I mean, one of the things, obviously, the T1 and the SY55 are chalk and cheese in terms of keyboard makeup, because the T1 is a weighted keyboard, and the SY55 is a synth keyboard. But really what we're looking for is sounds, and probably the best way to do that would be to MIDI the two units up and then play both units from one keyboard, and therefore you're comparing like with like in terms of you're just comparing the sounds rather than the actual capabilities of the keyboard itself. The only thing I will say about the Korg T1 over the SY55 is I can move the SY55 on my own. The box isn't that big, but it takes 2 roadies to move the T1. And it's also interesting to read about what you say as the successor for the Korg, for the T and the M. Now I always, you know, in my mind, the M series was succeeded by the T, and the T went O1W, and I always saw the X3 as a bit of an unusual keyboard, because it kind of was more simplistic than the O1W, and more, maybe, as you rightly say, more of a successor to the M1 than the T was, in terms of, you know, the T3 was the natural machine from the M1, and then they gave you the expanded 76 and the 88 of the T2 and T1 respectively. But I just find it very interesting that your take is slightly different to mine, but then we all have our own view on how certain things work. Of course, the next keyboard in the Korg range that came out after this was they went back to what they were really good at. I wasn't impressed with the O1W, I have to be honest. That's why it's not made it into my collection in any format. But the Trinities and the Tritons were the kind of the next step, and they really then took Korg forward again in terms of capability and functionality of keyboard. But thank you for your very interesting comment.